Rocky. Stallone cranked out the script in about 3 days, pushed hard to play the lead, and somehow convinced the studio to roll with it. The entire thing cost only about $1.1 million to make, but it went on to pull in around $225 million worldwide. That's some absurd return math, over 11,000%. It blew past every other movie that year and became the top grosser of 1976. Filming started in Philadelphia in January, right after Stallone locked himself into the role. The studio shelled out roughly $100,000 in producer fees and $4.2 million on advertising, and even that was a gamble. And yet this gritty underdog story gave birth to a whole franchise with 8 sequels and counting. Halloween. Shot in just about 3 weeks on a tiny budget hovering around $300,000, this indie horror flick didn't need flashy effects or big names to explode. It dropped in October 1978 with barely any promotion, yet still raked in around $70 million globally. That's more than 200 times what they spent making it. Jamie Lee Curtis made her debut, Michael Myers became a slasher legend, and the film carved out its place as one of the most profitable independent movies ever. Southern California stood in for Illinois, and honestly, no one seemed to notice or care. Its success practically built the map for the slasher genre. That quiet release turned into a billion-dollar franchise with more than 12 sequels trailing behind it. By the way, if you guys like movie content like this, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks. Anyways, Mad Max. Filmed around Melbourne on a shoestring budget of about 400,000 Australian dollars, this scrappy action flick didn't look like it was built to conquer anything, but it did. Shot over 6 weeks, the crew sometimes got paid in beer, which sounds about right for how wild the production was. Yet despite the chaos, it ended up pulling over 100 million worldwide. That landed it a Guinness World Record for the highest box office to budget ratio ever at the time. North America only kicked in about 8.75 million, but the global take completely overshadowed that. Mel Gibson went from unknown to international star, and the film helped launch Australian cinema onto the world stage. For something this gritty and low-tech, it rewrote the rules on what a tiny budget could actually achieve. Paranormal Activity. Shot for a microscopic 15,000 inside the director's own house, this found-footage thriller pulled off one of the most ridiculous financial flips in film history. Oren Peli did nearly everything himself, writing, directing, filming, editing, and even bought the camera with a chunk of that budget. The two leads made around $500 each, which is wild considering the movie made nearly $193.4 million worldwide. It started out crawling through college towns with limited release, but once it expanded, the numbers just exploded. That return on investment hit somewhere around 645,000%, making it the reigning champ of low-budget gold mines. It also set the blueprint for how viral marketing could turn a micro-budget ghost story into a cultural beast. One creepy bedroom and a camcorder turned out to be a license to print money. Napoleon Dynamite. Filmed in 22 days during summer in Preston, Idaho, this offbeat comedy cost just $400,000 to make and somehow turned into a cultural juggernaut. John Heder played the lead for only $1,000 before renegotiating after it blew up. Fox Searchlight scooped it up at Sundance for $3.2 million, and it went on to make over $46 million worldwide. That's more than 100 times its budget, which is insane for a movie where the biggest action sequence involves a tetherball. It expanded from a small opening to more than 1,000 theaters, with word of mouth doing most of the heavy lifting. It ended up spawning a wave of merchandise, a short-lived animated series, and plenty of fan events years later. Somehow, awkward dancing turned into an empire. The Blair Witch Project. Shot in just 8 days back in 1997 using handheld camcorders in Maryland, this indie horror juggernaut barely spent more than a few $1,000s to get going. With a production budget floating between $35,000 and $60,000, and total costs later climbing as high as $750,000, it still pulled in around $248.6 million worldwide. That's a return of over 4,000 times the budget, which sounds made up, but is very real. The actors did the filming themselves, and most of the suspense came from clever improvisation and creepy atmosphere. It opened small after Sundance, then rolled out wide by the end of July 1999, pulling audiences in with its eerie realism and viral buzz. That lo-fi style ended up reigniting the found footage genre, and launched an entire era of shaky cam terror. Monty Python, and the Holy Grail. Shot on a tiny budget of about $400,000 and bankrolled by rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, this absurd medieval spoof somehow jousted its way to massive success. Released in 1975, it pulled in around $2.93 million during its original run, and later topped $5 million worldwide through re-releases and a loyal cult following. In the UK alone, it made over £2.3 million by the end of 1978, which was no small feat for a film featuring coconuts in place of horses. It became the top top-grossing British film in the US that year and carved out a spot as one of the most iconic comedies ever made. 14 times its budget is no joke, even if the movie definitely is. Friday the 13th. Filmed in New Jersey during fall of 1979, with a budget between $550,000 and $650,000, this slasher flick sliced through expectations when it opened in over 1,000 theaters in May 1980. It started strong with a $5.82 million domestic debut and went on to pull nearly $60 million worldwide. That's a return of more than 27 times what they spent making it. It became Paramount's second highest earner that year, right behind Airplane, which is pretty impressive considering its cast was mostly unknown and the effects were anything but fancy. The movie sparked a long-running franchise and helped define the rules of slasher horror. It also proved that masked killers, dark woods, and camp counselors were a disturbingly good combo for printing money. American Graffiti. Shot over 28 nights in Northern California during the summer of 1972, this nostalgic teen drama ran on a budget just under $780,000 and ended up making over $203 million after a 1978 reissue. Universal thought it was just TV filler until Coppola backed it, pushing the studio to release it theatrically with about $500,000 in marketing. It premiered in August 1973 and made around $140.6 million in its initial run, with $115.6 million of that coming from the US alone. And that's over 180 times what it cost to make. The film helped to launch George Lucas and became a major turning point for youth-centered cinema. It also built the foundation for what would eventually become Lucasfilm and the galaxy-conquering Star Wars empire. Clerks. Shot in black and white on 16mm film over 21 days in the very convenient store Kevin Smith worked at, this scrappy debut cost just under $28,000 to make. Post-production and music licensing bumped the total to about $230,000, but it still turned a massive profit. After premiering at Sundance in 1994, it was picked up by Miramax for $227,000 and went on to gross nearly $3.89 million worldwide, all while playing in fewer than 100 theaters. That's a return of roughly 144 times its budget. It launched Smith's career, introduced the View Askew-niverse, and gave the world a new kind of slacker comedy. Years later, it was even preserved in the Library of Congress for being culturally and historically important. Night of the Living Dead. Shot in black and white on a tiny budget of about $114,000, this grim zombie thriller was filmed around Evans City, Pennsylvania, using amateur actors and guerrilla-style methods. It premiered in Pittsburgh in October 1968 and went on to gross somewhere between 30 and 50 million worldwide, putting it among the top earners of that year. That's over 250 times what it cost to make, which is absurd for a film with no stars, no color, and no studio backing. It slipped into public domain, got countless reissues, and kept making money long after its original run. It also broke ground with a black lead at the center of the story and left audiences shaken with its bleak tone. Romero's Undead Blueprint became the go-to formula for modern horror. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, shot in Central Texas on a painfully tight budget under $140,000, this raw, sweaty horror film somehow sliced its way to nearly $31 million in North American box office. That's over 200 times what they spent, all without major stars or buckets of gore. It premiered in Austin in October 1974 and was pushed as a true story to freak people out even more. It landed among the top 20 grossers of that year, which is wild for something that looked like it was made with borrowed lights and unpaid labor. Leatherface made his debut here, launching a franchise and inspiring decades of slasher films. Even with its gritty look, it carved out a permanent place in horror history. Primer. Made for just $7,000 and shot over 5 weeks in Dallas with a crew so small it could fit in a minivan, this dense sci-fi puzzle quietly rewrote the playbook for low-budget filmmaking. Shane Carruth did nearly everything himself, writing, directing, editing, scoring, even starring, and somehow turned that micro-budget into a worldwide gross of around $545,000. That's more than 120 times what it cost to make, with some returns estimated closer to 200 times. It premiered at Sundance in 2004, won the Grand Jury Prize, and got a limited release through Think Film. Despite its small scale and brain-melting complexity, it became a major talking point in indie film circles and helped cement Carruth as a unique voice in sci-fi. My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Shot for just $5 million and filmed mostly in Toronto and Chicago over 2 months, this romantic comedy didn't start with much buzz, but ended up making nearly $369 million worldwide. It opened in limited release in April 2002 and expanded slowly, eventually sticking around in theaters for over 50 weekends. That slow burn led to a return of about 74 times times its budget, making it the highest-grossing romantic comedy domestically at the time. It pulled in over $241 million in the US alone, with another $127 million from international markets. Word of mouth carried it the whole way, and its theatrical run was so long, analysts started calling it the leggiest movie ever. Juno. Filmed over 6 weeks in Vancouver on a budget between $6.5 and $7.5 million, this sharp indie comedy paid itself off in just 20 days and kept going strong. Released in December 2007, it grossed about $143.5 million in the US and another $88.9 million internationally, bringing the worldwide total to roughly $232.3 million. That's around 31 to 36 times its budget, which is wild for a film with no explosions, car chases, or billion-dollar IP. It became Fox Searchlight's first movie to cross $100 million and earned 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Director, and Actress, with Diablo Cody winning for Best Original Screenplay. It was clever, awkward, and wildly profitable, exactly the kind of surprise hit that studios dream about. Open water. Shot on location in places like the Bahamas and Mexico with a $500,000 budget, this stripped-down survival thriller was financed by the filmmakers themselves and later sold to Lionsgate for $2.5 million after its Sundance premiere. Lionsgate spent about $8 million on marketing and distribution, releasing it in August 2004 on just 47 screens before expanding it to over 2,700. It went on to earn roughly $30.6 million in the US and $25 million internationally, hitting a worldwide total near $55.5 million. That's about 111 times its production budget, making it one of the most profitable ocean-based nightmares ever. Minimalist setup, massive box office, and no sharks were harmed. Moonlight. Shot in Miami on a modest $1.5 million budget, this quiet, powerful drama premiered in 2016 and went on to gross about $65.3 million worldwide. That's over 40 times its production cost, all without any big box office hooks or franchise tie-ins. It opened in limited release in October and expanded wide by mid-November, building momentum through critical acclaim and word of mouth. It became the first film with an all-black cast and LGBTQ themes to win Best Picture, also earning Oscars for supporting actor and adapted screenplay. The success not only amplified Barry Jenkins's profile, but helped turn A24 into a powerhouse for prestige indie films. Moonlight proved that intimate storytelling could deliver both cultural impact and serious financial returns. Get Out. Made on a tight $4.5 million budget, Jordan Peele's directorial debut premiered in February 2017 and quickly turned into a box office phenomenon. It earned about $176.2 million in the US and another $79.4 million internationally, bringing the total to roughly $255.6 million worldwide. That's a return of more than 56 times what it cost, making it one of the most profitable horror films in recent years. It ranked as the 10th most profitable release of the year and gave Peele the distinction of being the first black writer-director to break $100 million domestic on a debut. Blumhouse nailed the low-cost, high-return formula again, and the film's success proved smart. Horror could hit hard financially and culturally without blockbuster spending. Enter the Dragon. Shot in Hong Kong on a budget of about $850,000, this martial arts epic premiered just weeks after Bruce Lee's death and went on to dominate globally. It earned around $25 million in North America and hit roughly $90 million worldwide during its initial run, making back more than 100 times its cost. Re-releases through the years pushed the total past $220 million by 1981, and by 2001, it had crossed $400 million globally. Adjusted for inflation, the lifetime gross sits near $2 billion, which is outrageous for a film made with under $1 million bucks. It turned Lee into a global icon and helped launch martial arts into mainstream cinema forever. El Mariachi. Shot in just 14 days in Mexico for a dirt cheap $7,225, this no-frills action debut from Robert Rodriguez used water guns for props, desk lamps for lighting, and an amateur cast to keep things lean. Rodriguez even funded it partly by volunteering for medical trials. Columbia Pictures picked it up later and poured in about $200,000 for post-production and marketing before releasing it theatrically. Despite its minuscule budget, it pulled in over $2 million at the box office, returning nearly 285 times the original investment. It snagged a Guinness World Record for being the lowest budget film to pass $1 million in US box office, and launched Rodriguez's directing career in a single scrappy move. Once. Filmed in just 17 days around Dublin for about $150,000, this indie musical romance used real musicians, natural lighting, and handheld cameras to keep things intimate and cheap. It premiered at Sundance in 2007, won the Audience Award, and was picked up by Fox Searchlight. The US release started small with just 2 theaters before expanding to around 150 at peak. And despite the low-key rollout, it made nearly 21 to 23 million worldwide. That's over 140 times its budget, putting it among the most profitable micro-budget films ever. It won an Oscar for Best Original Song, and later inspired a hit Broadway musical, proving soft-spoken storytelling could hit hard. The Gallows. Shot around Fresno on a $100,000 budget, this found-footage horror flick pulled in nearly 43 million worldwide after opening wide in July 2015. It started as a micro-indie project in 2011 and was later reshot before Warner Brothers. And New Line gave it a 2,720 screen release. It made just under 10 million in its first weekend and finished with 22.7 million in the US and about 20.2 million internationally. That's a return of roughly 430 times its original cost, making it one of the most profitable horror films of its scale. Even with poor reviews, it nailed the Blumhouse formula: small risk, massive reward, and a haunted high school for maximum jump scares. Supersize Me. Shot for just $65,000, this documentary followed Morgan Spurlock eating only McDonald's for 30 days and tracking the physical toll. He gained over 24 pounds and saw his health nosedive. It premiered in May 2004 after winning big at Sundance and reached a peak of about 230 theaters. Despite the tiny budget, it grossed $11.5 million in the US and $22.2 million worldwide, pulling in more than 340 times what it cost to make. That return pushed it into the ranks of the most profitable documentaries ever. It also stirred up public debates around fast food and even nudged McDonald's into quietly adjusting their menu afterward. Eraserhead. Made over several years starting in 1972 with a patchwork budget of $100,000, David Lynch's surreal debut was funded through odd jobs and favors from friends, including help from Sissy Spacek and Jack Fisk. It premiered in Los Angeles in March 1977 and slowly built an audience through midnight screenings in cities like New York, San Francisco, and LA. Despite its bizarre tone and limited release, it eventually grossed around 7.1 million worldwide, returning roughly 71 times its original budget. It never had a major theatrical run but became a staple of cult cinema, launched Lynch's career, and was later preserved by the Library of Congress for its cultural impact. One Cut of the Dead. Shot in just 8 days at an abandoned water plant with a budget of only $25,000, this Japanese indie horror comedy used mostly amateur actors and a student crew to pull off one of the wildest box office turnarounds ever. It opened quietly in a small Tokyo theater for a 6-day run, then exploded after festival buzz in 2018, eventually hitting around 200 screens across Japan. It made about 27.9 million domestically and reached a worldwide total near 31.2 million. That's over 1,000 times its original cost, breaking records for micro-budget returns. It gained critical acclaim and cult status thanks to its smart structure, inventive direction, and total commitment to chaos. If you enjoyed this, I post movie content like this all the time. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.